The International Monetary Fund has warned that the country's rising debt stock still remains a major threat to firmly stabilizing the economy. Now, this is coming after the fund projected that Ghana will end the year with a debt-GDP ratio of 77% from the current 68%. And this was captured in its Sub-Saharan Africa Regional Economic Outlook released in Washington, D.C. In an interview that was responding to a question to the head of the African Department, Abebe Selassie, says that development is worrying. Okay, so my question is that in terms of what are the threats to the Ghanaian economy going forward? We had some shocks from COVID-19, but going ahead, what are the threats to the Ghanaian economy? And is the debt still an issue? I know that we are being classified as high risk of debt distress. What's the situation now? Are we improving or things are getting worse, please?
Thanks. Ghana, of course, faces very significant challenges on its economy. After the difficulties of 2014-15, there had been a period of quite strong reforms and consolidation, and was on a reasonably good trajectory. But of course, the pandemic has come and really shaken the foundations of Ghana's economy as it has much else. This year, the policy response has been very supportive, as needs to be the case. But going forward, it will be very, very important to make sure that that policies revert back to making sure that there is much more of a focus on keeping debt stable and bringing it down gradually. So I think much will depend on how quickly this policy recalibration takes place. And given how high debt levels were in Ghana, I think the quicker that's done, the better. So I think the government is of the same view, and effecting those reforms will be of paramount importance. As you know, in all our conversations in Ghana, in our comments in Ghana, we've been saying, it's really important that we strongly supported the government's vision of, as the president has been saying, Ghana beyond aid. That's absolutely the right vision. And of course, that aid has to be replaced by tax revenues and other permanent domestic sources of financing rather than debt. And so effecting that transfer is really what's going to be key. And we'll be working with the government through the Article 4 process to provide technical advice, whatever the government needs.
The latest data from the Bank of Ghana puts the total debt stock ending July at 263 billion Ghana cedis. Ghana has been classified as a high risk of debt distress country. Let's get on to Zoom for some discussions and engage financial economist Dr. Lord Mensah on the concerns raised by the IMF and how those issues are well grounded. Good afternoon, Doc, and thank you for joining us on Marketplace this afternoon. First, let me ask you, what do you make of these concerns being expressed by the International Monetary Fund about our rising debt stock and the impact on the economy?
Oh, yeah, George. Good afternoon. And good afternoon to our viewers. I would say clearly it is of a concern. I mean, if you look at our debt level and even the intention of the fiscal gap that we intend to create during the budget review, I mean, clearly it gives you the signal that if you don't take care by the end of the year, we'll end up having a huge debt. And I think they are projecting somewhere around 76% to our GDP. Now, every debt is of a concern, and especially when you're looking at the debt that is being spent on, enhancing revenue generation. So if you look at some of the investment that we've done, clearly is to ensure that we domestically mobilize enough revenue. But you can see that our revenue is going down, and it gives a signal to worry. But then the hope is not lost because we still have our resources intact. What we have to do now is to be a bit conserved in terms of our, fiscal gap that we intend to create every now and then. If we give ourselves 5 years and we adapt that conserved nature for which we will not go deeper into aggressive way of, creating a huge budget deficit, i.e., ensuring that, we spend to beat some target. At least we should allow the current generation to sacrifice for some of our debt, but rather than pushing it to the future generation. The reason why I'm saying this is that, we seem to be adopting a posture where we want to aggressively spend, but then we spend into areas that productivity is quite difficult to measure. When you do that, it becomes difficult to look at your debt. But then we still have our resources intact. If we are to maintain, that conservative attitude of reducing our expenditure in a way. When we talk about debt management, we always look at revenue mobilization, but sometimes we need to sacrifice, and the sacrifice that we're talking about here is allowing the current generation to bear some brunt of our debt. We don't have to provide certain amenities to people who don't need them at this moment. So effectively, if we are to go by that direction, we should be able to, manage our debt in the next, 5 years, whilst we still have our resources intact.
Prof, is the concern about where these debts are directed to? Because this has not been the first time that the fund and even our development partners, we've not forgotten about HIPIC. Now we are being classified as high risk of debt distress. When you look at the debt sustainability analysis, it looks like it's getting worse and worse each and every year. But government tells us that they are managing our debt, there's a debt management control and all the rest. What are we not getting it right in terms of rather slowing the growth of debt and also ensuring that we are removed from that tag of a distressed country?
Yeah, like I said earlier, if you look at our appetite, to borrow, it is tied to basically our political cycles and basically providing the necessary infrastructure for the people. Now, if you look at Africa, there's a huge infrastructure, deficit, for which Ghana is part of it. If you don't strategize very well, you might think, okay, fine, you are providing this infrastructure for the current generation to build up the future. But then by so doing, you end up accruing, more debt. The problem is that we need infrastructure, but then we have to strategically spend, set our priorities right in our spending. Then in that case, we should be able to manage, our debt. Now, for instance, if you take in our economy, we've spent a lot on digitization. And I think one of the recommendations that came from the IMF was to look at our digitalization and how it fits into revenue generation. We're not getting that. We've spent money all right, but we are not getting, that link between how we are digitalizing the system and then how it's enhancing revenue generation. So effectively, if we should get it right, we should be able to, invest in areas that can build up our revenue generation. And normally, if we are targeting our debt, we have to look at it in relation to our revenue generation, not the GDP in general, because, the GDP, you can have it, but part of it might not necessarily build up into revenue generation. You can have a huge GDP base, but then in the end, revenue mobilization becomes a problem. So effectively, if you have a system where debt is growing, but then in the end, revenue mobilization turns up to be reducing, then it becomes a problem. It's a matter of setting your priorities right and spending in critical areas. We know we need infrastructure, but then if infrastructure delivery shouldn't be all hands on, it should be targeted.
So, Doc, if I get from you finally, it means that, listen, if you want to improve the situation, let's look at improving revenue mobilization internally. And you think that Ghanaians are ready for this?
Well, that is why I'm saying that we have to sacrifice, as a country. Sometimes we keep on prolonging. If you look at the debt management strategies that we've been adopting recently, it's a matter of, prolonging our debt. Sometimes we have extended maturities, and those maturities are for the future generations. The current generation, what are we doing as far as our debt is concerned? Are we ready to sacrifice some freebies that we are enjoying from the government? Are we ready to sacrifice, some pain in tax increment? That is what I'm talking about here. So we need to look at the sacrifice from the current generation rather than keeping on to prolong our debt, shifting it into the future for our children to bear.
Prof. Doc, I thank you so much for your time for this afternoon. Have a great day.
You're welcome, sir.